Egypt says it is now in control of the Sinai Peninsula, a day after a brutal terror attack. New Ebola cases are reported in Liberia. What are authorities doing to contain a possible outbreak? And one of the most famous housewives in the U.S. is leaving her longtime reality TV home. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. First tonight, the United Nations mission in South Sudan says anti-government rebels opened fire on a peacekeeping base sheltering thousands of civilians, killing at least one person and wounding 6 others. Wednesday's attack came in the same day United Nations Security Council imposed sanctions on 6 military commanders from South Sudan for perpetuating the conflict there. 3 government military generals and 3 rebel commanders are now subject to a global travel ban and an asset freeze. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Samantha Power said the sanctions demonstrate that those who commit atrocities and undermine peace will face consequences. Power also said the U.S. and other Security Council members are demanding both the government and rebels cease offensive military action and commit to negotiating a peace deal. President Salva Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar have signed a peace agreement since fighting between forces loyal to each leader erupted in December 2013. The truces were all broken and the stalemate continues. The United Nations says that the 18-month conflict in South Sudan has killed thousands and forced more than 2 million people to flee their homes. While Egypt launched airstrikes on Islamist militant targets in the Sinai Peninsula on Thursday, killing 23 fighters a day after the deadliest clashes in the region in years. A security source says those killed had taken part in Wednesday's fighting in which 100 militants and 17 soldiers died. Egypt says it's now in control of the Sinai region. In a broadcast statement, Egypt said security forces responded by killing 100 militants while 17 Egyptian troops died in fighting. Israel Prime Minister expressed his condolences to Egypt and issued a call for the international community to unite in battling ISIS.
We see ISIS at the gates, across the border in the Golan, across the border in Egypt. We send our condolences to the government and people of Egypt for the fallen Egyptians slayed by ISIS terror. We must stand up to all the forces of militant Islam, those led by Iran, those led by ISIS. We should not strengthen one or the other. We should weaken both of them.
Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is vowing to crack down on militants and extremists. He pledged to toughen laws against militants while attending the funeral of Egypt's top prosecutor Hisham Barakat, who died this week following a cab bomb attack on his motorcade.
احنا لغاية دلوقتي ما عملناش إجراء استثنائي واحد.
Until now, we haven't taken a single exceptional measure. You don't know of the state grip. Please, I say it again. We are executing the law. If you issue a death penalty, we will execute the death penalty. If you issue a life sentence, the life sentence will be executed. The law, the judiciary, this is what we want.
Islamic extremists have increasingly attacked Egyptian security forces on Sinai since Mr. Sisi, who once was the military chief, led the army's overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood's pro-Islamist president Mohamed Morsi in 2013. Well, a Tunisian official says 12 people have been detained for questioning in connection with the last week's attack at a beach resort that killed 38 people. Officials say the lone gunman, Saif Regzour, was killed by security forces following the mass shooting Friday in the city of Sousse. Still, authorities are searching for people who may have provided help before the attack. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility. Now, Britain has pledged a tough response after last Friday's terror attack in Tunisia that killed many British tourists. The attack came just days before the 10th anniversary of the bomb attacks on London's transport network. Security services are now having to shift the focus of their counter-terrorism operations overseas. Henry Ridgwell reports from London.
In eerily realistic scenes, 3 gunmen shoot their way into a London metro station. Britain's emergency response is put to the test. The 2-day drill this week is designed to mimic recent attacks in Paris and Sydney. For many Londoners, it's also a grim reminder of events 10 years ago, the July 7th bombings that targeted the city's transport network.
Tragically, after 7/7, of course we took the learning, we adapted our policies and our procedures, but styles of attack, they also change, and we have to evolve and make sure that we're ready and we have the right skills to be able to respond.
But the heart of counter-terrorism is shifting overseas, says Raffaello Pantucci of the Royal United Services Institute.
The ideology is such now that it basically says you attack Westerners wherever you can find them and whatever they look like. And so whatever target becomes possible becomes a potential target. The problem is that multiplies the sort of number of potential targets and in a huge number of potential countries.
Tunisia's president admitted Tuesday the security services were taken by surprise.
The security forces made provisions for the month of Ramadan, but they never would have thought that it would happen on the beaches where the tourists are, and the system of protection was to start on July 1st.
Prime Minister David Cameron has not specified how Britain will respond to the Tunisia attacks. It must involve working with overseas allies, says Pantucci.
It has to be about building local capacity, because that's the main lever that you have. All you can really do is help develop the locals so that they are able to respond to their domestic threat more effectively.
Britain's security services say a domestic attack is highly likely. They are well drilled in their response. But the attack in Tunisia underlines the limits of their abilities to protect nationals overseas. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, the Italian Coast Guard rescued more than 900 migrants in the Mediterranean Sea earlier this week from several boats which were in difficulty off the Libyan coast. Now, in dramatic video released by the Coast Guard, dinghies and boats are crammed with migrants who were seen pulling up to the Coast Guard vessel and rescued. EU leaders last week agreed to speed up the repatriation of migrants who do not qualify for asylum in a bid to discourage people from attempting the dangerous crossing of the Mediterranean. Heads of government said they would press countries in Africa and elsewhere to take back migrants and seek to give the EU's Border Protection Agency new powers to return newcomers. Now, the United Nations has declared its highest level humanitarian emergency for Yemen, where it says more than 80% of the population is in desperate need of aid. The misery of Yemeni civilians was compounded Wednesday when missiles fired by Shia Houthi rebels killed at least 31 people and wounded 100 in the southern city of Aden.
What happened was random shooting on innocents and residents and women and children. These are acts of cowards.
Well, the Houthi rebels seized the capital Sana'a last year, forcing Yemeni President Abdul Rabbu Mansur Hadi to flee to Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are leading an Arab coalition in a campaign of airstrikes aimed at restoring the Hadi government. Well, Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras says he is sticking with the plans for a Sunday referendum on bailout terms demanded by European creditors. He is also willing to accept terms much like those his government had previously rejected. Zoe Ludeke has more.
Personally, I never expected the democratic Europe not to understand the need to give time and space to the people to decide on their future. But the prevalence of extreme conservative circles have suffocated the country's banks, and it is obvious their goal is to transfer the blackmail of the government onto every single citizen.
Greece is cut off from further European aid after failing on Tuesday to meet a midnight deadline for repaying $1.8 billion to the International Monetary Fund. Some analysts suggested that the Greek Prime Minister's insistence on having a referendum is part of a strategy aimed at gaining leverage in future talks on the $32.4 billion in new European funding. In response, German Chancellor Angela Merkel again said there will be no more negotiations until the outcome of Sunday's referendum is clear.
Wir können das auch in Ruhe abwarten. We can now wait calmly because Europe is strong, much stronger than 5 years ago when the European debt crisis began in Greece.
The government of Prime Minister Tsipras is focusing on an intense pre-referendum campaign to persuade the Greek people to vote no, meaning no to austerity measures. At the same time, Eurogroup chairman Jeroen Dijsselbloem says a no vote in Sunday's Greek referendum puts into question Greece's membership to the Eurozone.
En als men zegt dat willen we niet, ja, dan is er geen basis.
If people say we don't want that, then there's no basis for a new program. But it would be very much the question whether there would be any basis at all for Greece in the Eurozone.
The Greek people are divided, and at this point it is difficult to predict the outcome of the referendum. Greece has amassed a huge debt over the last years, and its lenders have insisted that Athens impose more austere economic reforms as a condition for receiving new loans. Greece says its citizens have suffered enough, with spending cuts and tax increases that have lowered severely their standard of living. Greek banks are closed this week as an emergency measure to control financial turmoil. Automated cash machines have continued operating, but with sharp restrictions on the amount of money account holders can withdraw. In Athens, on Wednesday, officials allowed about 1,000 bank branches across the country to open, so pensioners who do not have ATM access can withdraw cash.
Well, President Barack Obama says the United States will soon reopen its embassy in Cuba for the first time since 1961, ending a half a century of isolation. VOA White House correspondent Luis Ramirez reports.
For a half century, the former U.S. Embassy on the Havana waterfront has been a symbol of the frozen ties between Washington and Cuba's communist government. On Wednesday in the White House Rose Garden, President Obama formally announced a thaw.
A year ago, it might have seemed impossible that the United States would once again be raising our flag, the Stars and Stripes, over an embassy in Havana. This is what change looks like.
Critics in the U.S. Congress and some Cuban exiles say resuming ties is a concession to a government that refuses to change. Cuban police continue to round up human rights advocates, and the internet is off limits to most Cubans. President Obama believes engagement will bring liberalization.
Nobody expects Cuba to be transformed overnight. But I believe that American engagement through our embassy, our businesses, and most of all through our people is the best way to advance our interests and support for democracy and human rights.
Historically, many in Latin America have criticized the United States for supporting repressive governments in the region. With the U.S. eager to spread its influence on Cuba, Frank Calzon, director of the Center for a Free Cuba, says President Obama could inadvertently be fomenting an image he's trying to end.
I'm afraid that the president is going to have to get used to see his picture with Raul Castro in that collection of infamous photographs with Latin American dictators.
Despite the criticism, the changes are going ahead. President Obama plans to send Secretary of State John Kerry to Havana later this month to raise the American flag and reopen the U.S. Embassy. Luis Ramirez, VOA News at the White House.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Coming up, Liberian authorities swing into action as new Ebola cases are reported. Stay with us.
Technology, here's what's new.
What's new is Google's self-driving test cars motoring around the roads of Mountain View, California. Google's Chris Urmson says if all goes well, these driverless cars will eventually save hundreds of thousands of lives.
We can bring in technology that's always paying attention, that can see what's going on around it, that never gets distracted. This is a huge opportunity. This is one of these kind of 10x kind of opportunities to save lives and make the world a better place.
For now, the test cars will move at speeds no faster than 40 kilometers per hour, and a human test driver will be in the car for each ride, just in case. Along with saving lives, there are other major benefits of driverless cars. For instance, their ability to return home to park, waiting to be summoned by its owner when his or her workday is over.
When you start to think longer term about the impact on cities and the ability to reclaim space and to reduce congestion and free up parking, this is something where we can have a huge impact.
For VOA's What's New, I'm Todd Grosshans.
Well, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu. What do you have for us today, Lino?
Hello, Vincent. Well, the Liberian government says it's been analyzing its response to the Ebola epidemic. The discovery of new cases has undermined the country's recent success in containing the Ebola outbreak, which began last year in West Africa, the deadliest ever. A military operation from the United States, the involvement of local communities, plus hundreds of millions of dollars in aid, helped Liberia control the outbreak by improving sanitation and providing safe burials. The country has invested some of the aid it has received into the healthcare system, among other things. Those who have survived the epidemic are confronted with some challenges. James Collier, Liberian Deputy Minister for Fiscal Affairs, elaborates on some steps put in place to help survivors.
So all of those things, we find a way to intervene. How do you carry what we call cash transfer into those communities to be able to give them something so that they're able to get back on their feet? Because Ebola did cause for some of them economic disruption. So those who are recovering or survived Ebola, the residual health effect, the Ministry of Health is looking at that. Those who have some psychological problem, there's still some folks based on the stigma cannot go back sometime into the communities in which they were because people think they stay adequately contagious and they could stay adequately infected.
Now, Chinese peacekeepers in Liberia have launched an emergency plan following Tuesday's announcement of the discovery of another Ebola case in the country. Liberia's Vice Health Minister Tolbert Nyanswa announced on Tuesday that Ebola virus had been found in samples taken from the body of a 17-year-old patient. The commander of the Chinese peacekeeping contingent called on all its 558 members to upgrade prevention and control levels.
We've launched an emergency plan in response to the new Ebola case. All officers must wear masks, gloves, and protective suits before going out on missions. All vehicles must be sterilized upon return to the camp, while officers must sterilize their hands and shoes and have their temperatures taken.
And finally, Liberian health officials are monitoring 175 people to contain the new Ebola outbreak as the country records new cases weeks after it was cleared of the disease. Liberia has confirmed the third new case of the deadly Ebola virus on Thursday. 2 new cases of Ebola were recorded on July 1st, nearly 2 months since the West African country worst hit by the disease was declared Ebola-free. As Liberia fights to quickly contain the new Ebola outbreak, the family of one victim in the village of Nedowin were confined to their home. Adolphus is the uncle of a 17-year-old man who died of Ebola on Tuesday in Margibi County, a rural area about 30 miles from the capital, Monrovia.
We came here since Sunday, and the quarantine started Monday morning. Because Sunday we did a burial and we came. But Monday in the morning, we came and they said we got to stay here for 21 days.
Health officials went through the neighborhood to spread awareness and get the community involved in containing the outbreak. Involving the community is how Liberia won the fight with the deadly disease the first time around.
I think our people know we just have to come back to what we were doing before. Because we were doing hand washing, we were very careful, no hand shaking. Because now I think we really have to be careful than ever before.
Health officials in Nedowin have been working hard to identify who made contact with the latest victim, a boy who had attended school and visited a local clinic in the week before his death.
I feel very bad about this. Some of us, our school business will stop. I hustle. That will also stop. And I learned that they will quarantine our area. This made me feel bad.
A local doctor says officials have not ruled out the possibility of transmission from an animal. In past outbreaks, humans have been infected by eating monkey flesh. There are currently no indications that the case was imported from a neighboring country, and Margibi County is far from the epidemic's remaining hotspots. 4,800 lives have been claimed by the Ebola virus in Liberia. More than 11,200 people have died in the past year in what has been the worst outbreak of Ebola ever recorded. Nearly all of the victims have come from Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. U.S. military operations aimed at helping Liberia's government counter the outbreak has mostly withdrawn. But the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it is working with local authorities to study the origin of the cases and stop the virus spreading. And that's our Africa Health Report for today. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, thank you very much, Lino, for joining us today. Be sure to watch for Lino Madu every Tuesday and Thursday for the latest health news in Africa right here on Africa 54. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, a real housewife leaves the nest. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Nene Leakes is moving on from the Real Housewives of Atlanta. The Bravo channel said that Leakes won't return for the reality show's 8th season this fall. She's been with the series, which follows the lives of a group of women in Atlanta since it began in 2008. Andy Cohen, executive producer of the Real Housewives franchise, tweeted that Leakes is a Real Housewife forever and is always welcome back. The 48-year-old Leakes parlayed her reality TV fame into an appearance on Celebrity Apprentice, roles on shows including Glee, The New Normal, and a fashion collection. Next up, more bad news for Republican presidential candidate and reality star Donald Trump. Retailing giant Macy's is pulling the Donuts brand merchandise from its stores. The department store has come under intense pressure to cut ties with the real estate magnate and businessman after he referred to immigrants from Mexico and other countries as killers and rapists. In a statement Wednesday morning, Macy's said the company stands for diversity and that it had no tolerance for discrimination. And finally, what do you get when you cross a caffeine fix with a dash of vanity? A Slovakian entrepreneur thinks he has hit on the next big trend in the beverage market, colorless coffee. David Nagy is hoping to tempt consumers worried about staining their teeth, but who cannot bring themselves to give up the taste and smell of a traditional coffee. The recipe and method remain top secret, although Nagy says he uses high-quality Arabica coffee beans. The drink is marketed as a light, refreshing coffee, best served cold. And that is what is trending today. Vincent.
Well, thank you very much. Now, a new exhibit at the Washington Museum features a collection of photographs offering a rare look at life in the U.S. during the mid-20th century. The collection is helping to tell the story of a transforming America. VOA's Julie Tabo has the story.
A tender moment between mother and child. Workers constructing the Empire State Building. A lonely circus dwarf. These images are among the more than 130 photographs featured in a new exhibit called American Moments at the Phillips Collection in Washington. The photos were taken in America during a time of great social, economic, and technological change during the 1930s to the 60s by some of the most prominent photographers in the country.
These beautiful abstract views of the skyscrapers.
Renee Maurer curated the exhibit.
While putting the show together, we realized that, there was a story that could be told that reflected a time, place, and experience in America. Most of these photographs are from mid-20th century. The themes reveal different ideas, different moments of change.
Photojournalist Esther Bubley was best known for her portrayals of ordinary people and the changing role of women in the workplace during the 1950s.
I think it was the type of photographer that Esther Bubley was. She was always interested in really the human condition and how she could capture that in a photograph.
Bubley documented American bus travel, which had dramatically increased due to the rationing of gasoline and tires during World War II, while Bruce Davidson and Louis Farrer captured a society in buses, cars, and on subways during later years. Davidson also used his camera to promote change, with powerful images of poverty and the civil rights struggle in the segregated South.
He wanted to really show America what was still going on in the 60s. Really ask America, is this something that we can still tolerate? And it was important for him to show his audience that there's still a lot of work left to do.
Another focus of the exhibit was the rapid growth that was taking place over the years in major cities like New York. From Berenice Abbott's towering skyscrapers to Louis Farrer's street scenes. The exhibit also includes photographers who were published in books, magazines, and newspapers, and those who provided timeless images of some of the country's most beautiful landscapes. Renee Maurer hopes that American Moments inspires a better understanding of a time in America that was undergoing major change. Julie Tabo, VOA News, Washington.
Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune into VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC and in the mornings. Today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. And from all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
I'm Abdishakur Aboud with VOA Listeners' Question. This is VOA. Follow us online at voaswahili.com.
Real talk, real issues. The Real Africa. It's time to get the scoop. Monday through Friday on VOA. Find your time zone and get the scoop.
I'm Linor Moudou from Africa 54. This is VOA. Follow us on Africa 54. Go to facebook.com/VOA Africa 54.
We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. In a lively half hour, news, sports, health, lifestyle information, comments from our viewers. Africa 54, the best for Africa, about Africa. Join us only on VOA.